Welcome to Gross History, the channel where we dive into the most bizarre, revolting, and downright horrifying practices of the past. Today we're looking at a punishment that's as macabre as it gets: gibbeting. Gibbeting, also known as hanging in chains, was a form of post-execution punishment popular in Europe, especially in Britain between the 16th and 19th centuries. After someone was hanged for their crimes, their corpse would be placed in an iron cage or chains and hung from a tall post in a public place to rot. The purpose was to both humiliate the deceased and serve as a gruesome warning to would-be criminals. Sounds disgusting, right? Well, buckle up because it only gets worse. Here are the top 5 grossest facts about the practice of gibbeting. Fact number 1. Corpses were sometimes tarred first. As if the sight of a decaying body swinging from a pole wasn't enough, the process often began in a grisly way. In some cases, before the body was hung in its cage, it was boiled in tar. This was done for a couple of reasons. First, it helped preserve the body for longer, allowing the authorities to maximize the time it could be displayed without completely falling apart. But the other reason was to prevent birds and animals from eating the corpse too quickly. A tarred corpse would last longer before turning into a skeleton, making it a more effective and gross warning. Imagine seeing that. Rotting, tar-covered bodies swaying in the wind day after day. Gross. Fact number 2. The smell was unbearable. One thing people from the past don't mention much is the smell. Picture a decomposing body left out in the open, exposed to the elements but not buried or hidden away. It's been noted that gibbets were often placed near main roads or at crossroads, where many people would see them. As the corpse began to rot, it would produce a horrid stench, and in the days before modern sanitation or deodorization, that stench could spread for miles on a windy day. Travelers and townspeople passing by had to endure the constant stench of decaying flesh, which would only worsen in the warmer months. Some accounts from the 18th century even describe how the smell of rotting bodies would make people physically ill as they passed by. Fact number 3, pieces of the body could fall off. As the body decayed in its iron cage, it didn't just stay neatly contained. Limbs, flesh, and other parts of the body would occasionally break off and fall to the ground. These dislodged parts became a morbid curiosity for onlookers, and sometimes people would even take pieces of the corpse as souvenirs. Yes, you heard that right. In the 18th and 19th centuries, there are records of people collecting bones or other parts of gibbeting victims for their own keepsakes. This was seen as a kind of morbid good luck charm, or a way to remember the criminal's punishment. It's a whole new level of gross when people are casually walking off with chunks of a dead body. Fact number 4, corpses could hang for years. In some cases, the bodies of criminals were left hanging in their gibbets for years, sometimes decades. Once the flesh had rotted away, the bones and skeleton could still remain intact in the chains, swaying eerily in the wind. One resident of Scotland, Robert Bain, in an interview he gave to the Dundee Courier at 107 years old, remembered how the clanking of the chains from a gibbet at night terrified the surrounding inhabitants. William Jobling was one of the last men in England to be gibbeted in 1832. His body remained on display in a coastal location for 6 long weeks. But in many other cases, criminals hung for much longer. The skeleton of murderer John Breads, for example, hung from a gibbet in Sussex for over 50 years. Imagine walking by the same spot every day for your entire life and seeing that horrifying figure still dangling there. Fact number 5, gibbets could be targets for vandalism. While gibbets were intended to be terrifying deterrents, they didn't always get the respect the authorities expected. In fact, some gibbets were vandalized or outright destroyed by angry mobs or relatives of the executed. One famous case occurred in the late 18th century when a Scottish man named Alexander Gielan was sentenced to death for piracy. His body was gibbeted near his home village, but locals were so outraged that they tore the gibbet down and tried to bury his body themselves. Authorities then had to rebuild the gibbet and rehang his body. In some places, people would try to cut down the corpse or damage the gibbet, adding to the gruesome nature of the whole affair.